Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
The election of Donald Trump was a desired outcome of the Russian campaign targeting the 2016 American presidential election, but not its overall goal. The goal was to discredit the traditions, institutions, and personalities that make up American democracy in the eyes of its own citizens in the world, and it succeeded. It succeeded not only by attacking Hillary Clinton, manipulating the media, and poisoning the American public's common information space, but also by both clandestinely and brazenly supporting the candidacy of Donald Trump, while at the same time implicating the candidate and his campaign in unprecedented levels of corruption and criminality. In this sense, Trump, who expected to benefit from Russia's illegal efforts, and whose campaign was riddled with connections to Russian oligarchs, organized crime, and its intelligence services, was as much a target of the Russian effort as its intended beneficiary. This video will show how Russiagate is far from the conspiracy theory its detractors make it out to be. It is very much a real and unprecedented breach of American democracy, and if we do not learn from its lessons, we are doomed to suffer its continuing consequences. The central protagonists of this story, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, were born a world apart, and for most of their lives seemed to occupy non-overlapping, mutually incomprehensible universes. Vladimir Putin was schooled in the world of Russian intelligence. His experience as a young KGB officer in Dresden, watching crowds of protesters destroy the authoritarian system he had sworn to protect, made an indelible impression on the future Russian president. Following the collapse of the Soviet Empire, Putin struck alliances with fellow spies and organized crime as he rose through the ranks of power, first in St. Petersburg and later in Moscow. A core feature of Putin's ascent and later consolidation of power was the manipulation of domestic elections through compromat, propaganda, disinformation, seizure of media, outright violence, and fraud. Variations of these practices were exported abroad, first to Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and later to Western Europe and the United States. To understand Donald Trump, one must understand the world in which he rose to national prominence, New York and Atlantic City in the 1970s and 80s. Both were dominated by machine politics, where power lay in the hands of party bosses who operated a system of patronage and the transactional dispensation of favors. The influence of organized crime was ubiquitous, having infiltrated local government, party politics, city services, the judicial system, organized labor, the construction industry, and, of course, protection rackets and the black markets for illegal goods and services. Eurasian organized crime serves as a core nexus connecting the corrupt Russian power structure around Putin to Donald Trump and later members of his entourage and campaign. Trump's interactions with American organized crime establishes a clear modus operandi that makes his later financial dealings with its Eurasian counterpart as believable as the evidence makes it indisputable. Eurasian organized crime infiltrated North America at just the time and place when Donald Trump emerged as a fixture of American life. A core feature of the post-Soviet era, facilitated by an alliance between Russia's intelligence services and organized crime, is the vast transfer of illicit wealth from the East into the West by means of money laundering. The offshore financial secrecy network and the Western financial industry facilitated this theft. Much of this money found its way into real estate in Western Europe and the United States. Donald Trump engaged in multi-million-dollar branding, real estate development, and other business deals with figures close to the apex of the money laundering alliance between Russian intelligence and organized crime. Scandalously, there has been no official inquiry into Trump's financial entanglements with sources from the former Soviet Union. Open-source research into these matters paints a damning picture. Russia's intelligence services weaponized corruption to suit the purposes of the Kremlin long before it cultivated Donald Trump. These dark arts were central to Putin's ascent to the presidency. Russia used its energy resources to create organized crime-linked oligarchs in Ukraine, who exercised their influence in Kyiv on behalf of the Kremlin and maintained contacts with individuals in Trump's orbit. The roots of Russia's campaign against the United States began long before Trump became the Republican nominee. Putin's relationships with Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, and the foreign policy issues that caused the deterioration of Russian-American relations are essential to understanding what motivated Putin to take such a risky, potentially reckless course of action in 2016. In particular, Putin's rage at Hillary Clinton and his blaming of her for protests in Russia against his reign set the stage for his act of revenge against the former Secretary of State. Putin's early seizure of Russian television, his paranoia regarding the role of social media in popular revolutions, and how he used an army of internet trolls to attempt to destroy the internet in Russia as a democratic space, shed light on the Internet Research Agency's propaganda campaign targeting the United States. While the IRA used an army of trolls and well-honed disinformation techniques to denigrate Hillary Clinton and support Trump, its overall mission was broader and more nefarious. It sought to exploit pre-existing fault lines in American society, in particular, working to arouse apathy and distrust among African Americans to suppress their voting numbers to benefit Trump. This effort was mirrored by multiple efforts undertaken by the Trump campaign and his closest supporters. At the height of the 2016 election, Donald Trump denied having any business dealings in Russia, while two of his representatives, Felix Sater and Michael Cohen, both now convicted felons, were negotiating several potential Trump Tower Moscow projects. As the Kremlin easily recognized Trump's lie, it amounted to a counterintelligence nightmare and a form of compromat. A complete picture emerges only when Sater's extraordinary background in organized crime and intelligence circles is understood, along with Cohen's role as Trump's fixer and his ties to organized crime. Between them, Sater and Cohen interacted with figures tied to Eurasian organized crime, individuals at the center of massive Russian money laundering operations, a general from Russian military intelligence, and Putin's personal press secretary. Trump's campaign chairman, yet another convicted felon, Paul Manafort, has so many connections to Kremlin-backed Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs, Eurasian organized criminals, and Russian intelligence officers that his remarkable life before the 2016 campaign could fill an entire book. The background of Manafort's Russian paymaster, Oleg Deripaska, with his ties to the Izmailovskaya criminal syndicate, the Kremlin, and Republican lobbyists is well detailed. During the election, Manafort was in regular contact and met twice with Konstantin Kilimnik, described by the Senate Intelligence Committee as a Russian intelligence officer who may have been involved in the GRU's hack and leak operation, and provided him with internal Trump polling campaign data, which Kilimnik delivered to Russian intelligence. Manafort and Kilimnik also met secretly to discuss a mysterious Ukrainian peace plan that would have divided Ukraine along lines favorable to the Kremlin. All the while, Manafort engaged in a series of bizarre and highly suspect real estate transactions, potentially to cover up illegal financial activity. A little over a month after the GRU began targeting the Clinton campaign, a Trump foreign policy advisor named George Papadopoulos was informed by a Maltese professor who had just returned from Moscow and enjoyed long-standing ties to Russia that the Russians possessed dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of emails. Papadopoulos shared what he learned with an Australian diplomat and Putin-supporting officials in the Greek government, but told later investigators that he couldn't recall if he had informed anyone on the Trump campaign. The Senate Intelligence Committee didn't find this explanation plausible. Another Trump foreign policy advisor, Carter Page, who spent years living and investing in Moscow and had been cultivated by Russian foreign intelligence, was invited to Moscow during the campaign to speak at a prestigious institution despite being virtually unknown only weeks earlier. Trump delivered his first major foreign policy address at an event coordinated by Jared Kushner and Dmitry Seemaze of the Center for the National Interest, which for years has been accused of being one of the most pro-Putin think tanks in Washington and had multiple links to the convicted Russian agent Marina Butina. The June 9th Trump Tower meeting, in which Donald Trump Jr. expected to receive incriminating information on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government, was but one part of a Kremlin influence campaign playing out in Moscow, Manhattan courtrooms, and the halls of Congress. It involved the Republican congressman and Trump supporter Dana Rohrabacher, who had been warned by the FBI that he was a target of Russian intelligence, and whose long-term associate and friend, Jack Abramoff, had years earlier likely been targeted by the GRU. Aras Agalarov, an Azerbaijani tycoon and Trump business partner with close connections to Putin, Eurasian organized crime, and KGB money laundering operations, set up the meeting. The Russian lawyer who attended the meeting, Natalia Veselnitskaya, enjoyed numerous connections to Russia's government and intelligence services. These facts, along with the shady backgrounds of others in attendance, formed yet another counterintelligence nightmare. Trump's top donor, Robert Mercer, and his chief ideologue and campaign CEO, Steve Bannon, founded the data analytics firm Cambridge Analytica with a British electioneering and private intelligence firm, SCL Group, which had its own shady connections to the worlds of organized crime and intelligence. Cambridge Analytica had a history of working to suppress black voting and its activities abroad, and, mirroring the efforts of the IRA, collaborated with the Trump campaign's internal data operation as it sought to suppress the African American vote. Cambridge Analytica appears to have interacted at times with Russian intelligence and worked with the Trump campaign and the major backers of Brexit. The separation of the UK from the EU was a primary policy goal of the Kremlin, and the so-called bad boys of Brexit had a litany of connections to Russia, Eurasian organized crime, and Russia's intelligence services. Two of the most prominent, Nigel Farage and Aaron Banks, met with and campaigned on behalf of Trump. Farage knew WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange personally and met privately with Trump and Roger Stone. Russia's efforts to get Trump elected overlapped with the preferences of the Israeli right and the rulers of the Gulf Arab states. These interests came together at a second Trump Tower meeting, where the billionaire Trump supporter Eric Prince, a former Navy SEAL and founder of the infamous mercenary contractor Blackwater, arranged for Donald Trump Jr. to meet with Joel Zamel and George Nader. Zamel founded Psy Group, an Israeli private intelligence firm with suspicious links to Russia in its ownership structure and clientele. George Nader was a pedophile political operative, offering the Trump campaign the support of the Gulf princes. Several firms and individuals from the Israeli private intelligence industry engaged in business relationships with both key Trump supporters and Russians closely connected to Putin and involved in Russian influence campaigns, including the 2016 election. Michael Flynn, Trump's highest-ranking military supporter and future national security advisor, was courted by Russian interests in the Trump campaign almost simultaneously. Before being forced out of government in 2014, an experience that left him feeling betrayed by the Obama administration, Flynn had visited the GRU's headquarters outside of Moscow. As a civilian, he was paid tens of thousands of dollars by the Russian propaganda network RT and other Russian companies. In 2015, he attended RT's 10th anniversary gala and sat directly beside Vladimir Putin. Trump personally tasked Flynn with using his intelligence connections to find Hillary Clinton's so-called 30,000 missing emails. The effort brought Flynn into contact with the Republican operatives Barbara and Michael Ledeen, as well as Peter W. Smith, a longtime foe of the Clintons, who spent part of 2016 searching the dark web and interacting with alleged Russian hackers who claimed to have the emails, which he wanted to offload to WikiLeaks. Roger Stone, Donald Trump's oldest political advisor and a decades-long associate of Paul Manafort, was in contact with both Russian military intelligence and WikiLeaks throughout the 2016 election. While publicly parroting the lie that the GRU wasn't behind the online persona Guccifer 2.0, Stone was in private communications with the GRU using Twitter direct messages and, as a close examination of the timeline establishes, may have been in contact with Russian military intelligence over encrypted channels. Stone predicted the leaks of John Podesta's emails before they occur and was involved with multiple potential WikiLeaks intermediaries throughout the election, which he later illegally attempted to cover up. Throughout all of this, he was in close and repeated communication with Donald Trump, sources in Israel close to Benjamin Netanyahu, Paul Manafort, Steve Bannon, Eric Prince, and multiple other members of the Trump campaign, with whom he undoubtedly discussed his insights into WikiLeaks, among other topics. Among the complex and Byzantine events of 2016, numerous important unanswered questions remain. In large part, this is due to the extensive cover-up and obstruction of justice perpetrated by the Trump administration and its allies during investigations into these crimes. This information is informed by the special counsel's report, several congressional investigations, thousands of pages of court documents, FBI search warrant affidavits, leaked government documents, personal memoirs, as well as numerous excellent recently published books on these topics. every major factual claim in this video is supported by copious documentation in the book While We Slept, now available on Amazon. It is this private citizen's humble and doubtless imperfect effort to portray what happened accurately, because authorities in the Trump administration lied to the American people about what took place during the 2016 election. Government and congressional inquiries into this all-important matter were obstructed and misrepresented. Government censors redacted much of their findings. The American media's short attention span and short-term financial imperatives prevented a comprehensive description of this epochal betrayal. And if we have any hope as a nation of avoiding the same trap we fell into in 2016, we must heed the lessons from what actually transpired in Russiagate.